Today we're going to be showing you how to install the prop version of our retro rocket and also our thrust vectoring unit. If you're looking for a fun experience with a very cartoony airplane that can do some really crazy maneuvers, this is definitely the video for you. So if you're ready to build along with me, let's get our materials in order and we'll get started. Now for the prop version here, you're going to see that there's two different pieces for our exhaust tubes. For the standard prop version, we're only going to need the larger one. This thinner one is going to actually be for our thrust vectoring unit. We're also going to pop out our two pieces here that are going to be our foam cross members that are going to hold our motor mount. Now you're going to notice something very important on our foam cross members, because you're going to notice that there's a little arrow pointing up. And the reason that this arrow is so important is this arrow is going to actually point up to the very top. You don't want to have this pointing downwards, because if it's pointing downwards, your thrust angle is going to be the opposite of what it needs to be, and your plane's going to dive into the ground. There's actually just a little bit of up thrust angle that's dialed into this to make it fly properly. This piece can be glued on either way, and all we simply need to do is slide it together and glue it. Let's go ahead and do that right now. I'm going to place a healthy bead of glue right on the inside. Little drops on both sides here. Obviously, whenever we press two pieces together, the glue likes to kind of squeeze out. I'm going to hold this right down flat against the table, and I can even take a scrap piece of foam and wipe off any excess glue that we may have. Make sure that your mount is perpendicular, and we'll let it fully cool, and we'll move on to our next step. Now that our motor mount X is dry here, we're going to go ahead and glue on our firewall. Now you're going to see that this firewall here is very skinny, and it's going to lay over right over top of our X mount, just like you see here. The important thing to note is that all four holes for the motor mounts pass cleanly through. There's really no way you can get this wrong. So all we want to do is line this up, and once we're happy, we'll glue it down. I like to start about a 1/4 inch from the edge, making sure we don't cross over the center, because that's going to be where our motor is going to kind of recess into. There we go. We're just going to press this down in place and let it dry. While this is drying, we can start preparing our main exhaust tube. Again, we're not going to need this one unless we're doing our thrust vectoring. We can go ahead and put this aside. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and peel our paper. Those two little etch marks were basically just indicators showing us exactly where we want to line up the very top. All we are looking for is the center section right here. And just like we were doing on our fuselage, we're going to use our thumbs and our fingers to slowly curl this around until it makes a complete circle. You can always use a table as your friend to kind of help you with the sharper bends at the very edge. And I always like to try to make sure that this doesn't fight me in any way. At this point, you've already built the retro rocket fuselage. This should feel second nature to you. Now that we have our ring formed and we can easily bring these two pieces together, let's go ahead and secure it with a bead of glue. And in the same way we did before, we're going to place a nice healthy bead of glue right down the middle. We're going to let it rest for about 15 seconds. Get all my little glue globs out of here. And now we can press it together. Give us about a minute to a minute and a half to fully cool, and then we can install it over our motor mount. Now that our exhaust port is done, we're going to locate the little arrow that's pointing up, and you're going to see the two notches here on the very top of our exhaust port. That's going to go exactly where the arrow is pointing. So here's my arrow. It's going to line right up there, and we'll just simply press it in. Again, we can kind of use a table as our friend to make sure that everything lines up perfectly. And that looks really good. And just like before, we always try to practice doing our test fits here. Now we can go ahead and press that out. You can kind of even see where the scuff marks are. It's up to you whether you want to put it on the actual piece or the actual exhaust port. I'm going to put it on the piece. Always looking for that arrow here. There it is. 1, 2, 3, 4. get it started. And I always want to make sure that's nice and flat, not pushed off at an angle. So I'll use a table as my friend here. Gonna move that just so we don't glue it to the table. There we go. And once this is dried in place, just like what we did on the center section, I'm gonna go back with a bead of glue and reinforce on each side. Let's let that fully cool, and then we're ready to mount our motor. So now that we have our motor mount and our exhaust tube completed, we're gonna go ahead and mount our motor. Now for me, in my opinion, the easiest way to mount the motor is actually with the wires pointing upwards. And the reason is because the ESC and all the wires are gonna actually pass through above this former, all the way through the top of the nose, and ultimately end up with the power lead coming right around the side here. The ESC lead that actually goes to the receiver is gonna pass through one of the two holes that you see right here. And at any time you want, you can always cut off these little tabs that you see. So now that we know which way is top here, I'm just gonna pass the screws through. I'm gonna line up one. It's always easier just to get all 4 of the screws started and then tighten them down once they're all threaded in. So there's one. Let's go ahead and tighten all 4 of them down now. You can choose if you want to use a little drop of Loctite. It's completely up to you. Now I'm just going to go ahead and take my leads. I'm going to favor on one side or the other, and I'm going to pull them through. Let's go ahead and prepare our ESC extensions, and also route it through the fuselage, and we'll get this ready to mount. Now included in our Retro Rocket Power add-on prop version, you're going to see these ESC extensions that you see here. These are critical because without them, we're not going to be able to get the battery lead to where we need it. Let's go ahead and open these up and then also attach it to our 25 amp ESC. Doesn't matter any order that you plug the extensions together, because ultimately, to reverse the direction of the prop, we only need to just swap any 2 of the 3 leads that we have right here. And now we're going to go ahead and pass our wires down through the exhaust port. We're going to let our battery lead fall. We're going to use gravity as our friend. And just some gentle bobbles here. You're going to see it falls down very naturally and easily all the way down. Good happy accident. We already have our ESC lead popping through where we want it, so we can just pull that through. And just a couple more bobbles. And we'll have our battery lead down where we need it. Oop. I can actually even just reach up there and push it through the hole. And there it is. It may help you to put a little piece of tape on your ESC lead if you don't want this to fall through, but you can see there's plenty of room to be able to access everything and kind of poke it and pull just to get everything routed. Now that our ESC wires are routed in, we're going to go ahead and do a quick test fit to make sure our motor fits into our exhaust port. Again, we always want to keep tabs on where the very top is. You can see that through the etch mark or through the 2 top tabs. Now if you built this right, this should simply pop in with just maybe just a touch of friction, just like that. Once you're happy with the way it fits and you've confirmed that the top notches here line up with the very top notch right behind our rudder, we can put a bead of glue in and we can glue it in. We only need a bead of glue right around our top exhaust port. There we go. I just kind of tuck that in there. And we'll just press that down. I like to give it just a little bit of twist, spread that glue around, and we'll let it dry. So one thing I love about the Retro Rockets is incredibly easy to service, and with the removable wings, we can easily be able to access everything in case we want to swap anything out or change it. Now that we have our motor connected, our ESC connected, and everything's routed, let's go ahead and hook it up to our wing. Now our wing is what's going to hold either our receiver or in this case the FT Aura 5 with a pre-programmed crow mode. Now we have a separate video showing you all about the FT Aura 5, downloading the Crow mode and testing it out. Feel free to check that out at your convenience. So for our next step, I'm gonna bring my son Noah's wing in here because this ultimately is gonna be his airplane. I'm gonna take the included 20cm extension, and for the FT Aura 5, I'm gonna plug it into place. This is gonna plug in the servo port 1 for the FT Aura 5. My next step is I'm just gonna connect my ESC wire, making sure the signals and the grounds line up. And because we have no prop on this, we can easily just set this down. Now that we have our FT Aura 5 and our ESC connected, I'm gonna go ahead and turn on my son's radio here. There we go. And we're just gonna make connection. Once we have our ESC wire connected to our servo extension that's going to servo port 1, I went ahead and connected our battery here, and now you can see we have power to it. Now the configuration files, again, will be listed down below, whether you're building the stock version that has the air brakes, or if you're building the thrust vectoring version. We have a special version for that as well too, that automatically keeps your servo from going too far and cutting into your trailing edge. If you just use a standard receiver, you're gonna wanna use the included Y harnesses to connect your left wing and your right wing. So basically one Y harness connecting your left wing, one Y harness connecting your right wing, and then just do a typical Elevon mix. This will give you everything you need, but it won't give you features like the air brakes. Now the most important reason why we wanted to plug this in here is we wanna make sure that our prop is moving in the right direction. I'm gonna go ahead and give us a little throttle. And the motor is spinning this way. Now that we know the motor is spinning this way, you can see that the numbers here on my prop is going to be pointing forward. That rotation is the exact rotation we want. If for any reason this is spinning backwards, all we need to do is take 2 of the 3 connectors and swap them. This will change the direction of the motor and give you the direction you need. I'm going to quickly check my direction, make sure that nothing needs reversed. When I pull back on the stick, my elevons go up. When I push forward, my elevons go down. When I push my stick to the right elevons go up. And when I push my stick to the left elevons go up. And when I flip my momentary switch for switch number 7, I have my Crow air brake. Now that we know everything's running in the right direction here, I can go ahead and fasten my wings down. Our next step is to install the batteries, check our CG, and install our prop. And as I mentioned before with mounting the prop here, that this actually is very, very tight around the shaft. It will tighten down no problem, but you definitely would benefit from using a socket set and holding the motor in place. Now our final step before we get to take this up and fly it is going to be to install our battery. The position our battery is directly going to control where our center of gravity is. Center of gravity on this plane starts at 10.25 inches from the trailing edge. So if we basically measure 10.25 inches forward, now don't worry, we put 2 little dots on the top surface of the wing so we can easily just put our fingers right over those dots, and then you can move your battery slightly forward or backwards to make the plane fly to your tastes. The position of our battery to get optimal CG, especially if you're buying our 2200 milliamp 3-cell, is going to be right at the top surface of this front battery bay. That means we're going to want to take the Velcro of our choosing and we're going to want to place that right down, right between the 2 battery straps. Now if you want some extra hold, you can purchase the battery straps optional and weed that through. So I always like to put my fuzzy on the fuselage just because it's fun to say. I'm going to put the full strip down here, starting from the very front and moving backwards, because in some cases, I may have a heavier battery or a larger capacity battery like a 3300 and want to put it back further. The best performance I've gotten though is out of the 2200. There we go. Just going to lay that right down in the middle and press it all the way back. Now I already have the Velcro on my other battery. I can simply lay this down, and again, my experience has been basically the very leading edge of the battery lines up with the edge of the battery box. And when I find my marks at 10.25, with the battery at this place and my fingers right over the marks on the wing, you can see that balance is pretty much perfect here, just a touch nose down, and that's exactly what we want. And at this point, our retro rocket is now ready to go out and fly. But before we go out and fly and have some fun, we're going to go back in time and we're going to show you how we install our thrust vectoring mod for the retro rocket. So in our retro rocket thrust vectoring kit, you're going to see everything that you see right here. First, we have the main mount that's going to connect the retro rocket to the thrust vectoring unit. We have our lower support, our side cheeks for our servo tray, which is actually the upper support, our 2 push rods, our center pivot rod, our main firewall, the outer supports for the firewall, and then the center section that the servo is ultimately going to be moving back and forth to make the motor move. The only thing that's not included in this kit is our 2 linkage stoppers, and as I mentioned earlier in the build video, if you're planning on building this, save those 2 extra linkage stoppers that came with your power pack add-on, because this is the point where we're going to use them. If you don't have these linkage stoppers, don't worry, we have them available in our store separately. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to glue all of our pieces together using our medium thickness Zap CA. So the really nice thing about this whole kit is it goes together incredibly easily. All I'm going to do is I'm just going to loose fit this stuff together. All I'm going to do is loose fit it together, and then I can let the CA wick into the joints and glue it solid. You notice our upper servo tray here, and our support's going to go on through. Bead glue on both sides is all we need. We'll go right down to the joints. I always love using just a quick spritz of kicker, locks everything in place really quickly. Because this is going to have a lot of stress on it, I'm going to go on the other side now and do the same process. I don't want any part of this cracking on me. I'm sorry. Now we're going to slide through our lower support. Drop of glue is all we need. And as you can see in the support here, there's actually going to be a thrust angle here. And that thrust angle is really important to make sure that we mount this towards the top. Now, if you watched in the first portion of the video, you saw exactly how we use this arrow and orientation with pointing upwards and line up with our center line. It's no different. Let's go ahead and glue our main firewall pieces together. I'll go ahead and just start with the center piece. There we go. And finally, we'll end with the outer 2 pieces. Again, these pieces take a tremendous amount of stress, so on this main upper and lower support, I'm going to put a bead of glue on both sides. All right, and just for a little bit of extra strength, like I mentioned before, bead of glue right over top on the other side, just to give it a little bit extra strength. And just like that, our firewall's done. Now to connect our firewall to our main thrust vectoring unit, we're going to go down about a ½ inch on the thickest wire that we have in our kit. I like to bend it just a little bit less than 90 degrees, and you'll see why in a second. Just going to do a quick pass through on the main section, and I want my bend to match up with the very top surface that you see right here. Just going to open it up just a little bit more. Next, we're going to mount our firewall by passing it through the outer supports, through the firewall supports, and then finally lining up with the bottom hole. We're going to press it through. Now we should have no slop at all, and you can see that we have quite an extreme amount of throw, which is exactly what we want. We're not going to glue down this top support yet, because our next step here is to install our servos and bend our push rods. So for that step, we're going to unbox our 20-gram servo, mount our servo arms, and our linkage stoppers. And as always, it's always important to center your servos before you mount this. So these servos typically come pre-centered, so it shouldn't move at all for you. We're going to take the 4-sided servo arm that you see here, and we're going to cut off 2 of the flanges. Now we can mount our centered servo arm right onto the servo, and then we're going to follow it up by installing our 2 linkage stoppers in the outermost holes. To mount our linkage stoppers, all we simply need to do is pass the linkage stopper through the outermost hole on our servo arms and press on the back keeper. There we go. These arms are going to be under a lot of stress, so I'm actually going to take my Zap glue. I'm going to put a little drop right on the bottom of the keeper and lock it down with a drop of kicker. Same process on the other side. Press all the way down. And again, because of the stress, just going to put a little drop of CA glue on the very bottom of the stud. Now that we have our servo prepared, our linkage stoppers on, our final step in installing the servos is to install our little rubber mounts and our metal bushings. And then we can fit it into place and screw it down. Next, we're going to pass the servo lead down through the hole for our servo mount. And we're going to carefully press it down into place, rotating it. And when you sight down the servo, you're going to see it lines up perfectly with the two holes ready to receive our servo screws. Next, we'll take our included screws and we'll screw it down. Now that our servo is mounted, let's go ahead and prepare our push rods for the left and right side. You're going to see two push rods here with standard Z-bends in them. You're going to see two push rods with standard Z-bends in them. Now typically Z-bends are exactly what we want, but in this case we need to turn it to a modified Z-bend. To do that, all we need to do is take our pair of pliers, we're going to grip it at 90 degrees, and we're going to bend the wire 90 degrees up. This is going to enable us to hook the push rod into the main arm that's going to pivot our motor and then rotate it 90 degrees and allow the motor to move back and forth without the end of the push rod coming into contact. Now with our modified Z-bend bent, we're going to go ahead and pass this through here, and we want this to line up perfectly with our linkage stopper. For that reason, we're going to focus on the top part of the arm that mounts to our motor, and then we can simply rotate this 90 degrees, and you can see that it'll perfectly line up when we fasten our linkage stopper. I always like to cut the push rods about 1/4 of an inch long. That's what I'm going to do right here. You can always save your extra material. If you need to make a change, or maybe you cut it too short or something that you don't like, you can always make a new one. Now I'm simply going to line up my linkage stopper and I'm going to pass it through. Now that I have it cut, all I need to do is line up my linkage stopper and pass it through. We're not going to tighten this down quite yet because we have one more push rod to prepare. Again, we're going to take our Z-bend, we're going to turn it into a modified Z-bend, but I do want to bend it the opposite direction. So we're going to go to the right this time. There we go. We're going to pass it through. We're going to pass it through and hook it on just like we did the other side. A little bit of twisting motion is all you need. There we go. And then finally we'll get it nice and neutral and cut about 1/4 inch long. And our final step before we lock down our linkage stopper is to use our servo centering tool, get your servo nice and centered once again in case you've moved it, and then make sure that your firewall is perfectly parallel to your main mounting point. Once everything looks good, you can lock down your linkage stoppers and we're ready to mount our motor. Our thrust vectoring unit is now done. The only final step that we're going to do is we're going to go back to the center little post right here, and this is going to be the main pin that you can move in and out. Now if you want to make sure this is never going to move out on you, all you simply need to do is take a drop of CA and glue down the wire to the top plate of your support bracket. Friends, our retro rocket thrust vector system is now done. Our next step is to mount our motors and put it onto the retro rocket. This will be the same way that we mounted the motor for our main unit here. We're going to want the leads to be pointing up towards the up arrow that you see here. You're going to notice that there's two different pass-throughs, and you can choose either one that you want to be able to pass it through. All we need to do is line up our 4 screws and screw them in. Make sure you don't tighten them until you get all 4 screws threaded. Now we're going to bring back our retro rocket. Now that we're ready to mount our thrust vectoring unit in, make sure that you have the step where we've routed our ESCs and our ESC extensions down through the top of the fuselage. So you can see we have our 3 extensions here. We have our ESC lead right here on the bottom passing through. That will make connection with our OF2 or OF5. And we also have the battery lead right up in the front right here. Our next step here is we're going to go ahead and do a quick test fit. Now we are going to need to cut 2 tiny little notches here in the circle to allow our thrust vectoring unit to be able to press up through and mount flush. So all we need to do is we're going to press this in. We're going to hop it just on the other side of the servo. line up our notches, and I just like to give a gentle little push up. You can now see the 2 marks that we're going to need to cut little reliefs for, and this is going to give us extra strength, keep the whole unit from torquing, and be able to seat it in properly. All right, I'm just going to go ahead and do quick 2 little slices, one here and one here. Just open them up a little bit. And we'll do one last little test fit. You can see that slides right up in there and pops into place. This gives it a nice key to keep it from rotating back and forth, and it'll make it incredibly strong. Now that we've done our test fit, we can come back with our hot glue gun. We'll put a healthy bead of glue right around the edge, all the way. Pass our lead through, press up through the notches, and push it down into place. While this is drying, we can go ahead and pick either one of our sides that we want to and pass our leads through one at a time. There's 1, there's 2, and there's 3. Now that the thrust vector unit's nice and dry, let's go ahead and make our connections. We can just go ahead and connect this any way we want, because if it's running backwards, all we need to do is swap any 2 of the 3 leads. Now that we have our leads connected, let's go ahead and prepare our exhaust port. Our exhaust port is going to be the thinner of the 2 exhaust pieces that we have. It's going to look just like what you see here. Feel free to pick either side that you want and peel off the excess paper. Now, using our thumb and forefingers, we're going to go ahead and mold the foam around until it forms a complete circle. This is the exact same process we did on many of the other parts of the retro rocket. Never want any of this to be under tension. We want it to naturally just flow around together very easily. There we are. Now we can place a healthy bead of glue right on the end. We're going to let it rest for about 15 seconds, and then we're going to press it together. Let's go ahead and hold this in place for about 1 minute to 1.5 minutes and let it fully dry. Our glue is nice and dry. Let's go ahead and do a test fit. I always like to keep the seam pointing downward. That way it looks nice. All we simply need to do is press this right on over. Our little, there we go. And I just got to rotate this a little bit more. There we go. And you can see that this notches down very nicely right inside the pocket, just like that. Once you're happy with the way everything fits, we can go ahead and remove that, put a bead of glue around the edge, and then press it down into place. All right. Again, I'm just kind of lining up that upper notch. A little bit of pressure and she'll pop right in. There we go. All right, our thrust vectoring unit's now installed. Let's go ahead and make our connections to the FT Aura 5. If you have the FT Aura 5, you can download our pre-configured file, which will give you everything you want with thrust vectoring. It'll dial in the direction and the moments that you want to make sure the prop doesn't hit the trailing edge. It'll also give you some really great features like level assist and launch assist. Keep in mind with the FT Aura 5 and the thrust vectoring unit, you're not going to get the air brake crow. I already have that downloaded on this wing right here. Let's go ahead and make our connections, and we'll test to make sure everything is moving properly. To prepare our wing, we're going to want to use the included Y harnesses. The Y harness the left wing together, and the Y harness the right wing together. So in other words, the 2 servos on the left will be connected to one Y harness, the 2 servos on the right will be connected to the other Y harness. That then gets plugged into the appropriate ports. All right, so I'm taking the 2 servos on the right side of my wing, and I'm plugging them into one Y harness. And I'll do the same process on the other side. Now, if you're not using the FT-Aura 5, no worries at all. You're still going to do this exact same process here. You're going to wire the two sides together. Your thrust vectoring unit is going to plug into your rudder servo port. Now I can go ahead and take my left side. I'm going to plug that into servo port number 2. Take my right side, plug it into servo port number 3. And if I remember correctly, my rudder should be on servo port number 5. If it's wrong, it's port number 4 and I'll switch it. Now that we have all our connections made, all I need to do is just simply tuck these back down underneath the bottom part of our wing and it'll clean up beautifully. So now I have one lead for my ESC and one lead for my rudder. I'm going to go ahead and plug in my ESC lead. And then finally, I'll just kind of rotate this over. I'm going to plug in my rudder. Now that we have our connections made, go ahead and mount your wing, and I'm just going to lightly screw it down into place. This has already been pre-bound to my son's radio here. I'm going to go ahead and power up the radio first. And just like that, all of our controls are working here. When we pull back on the sticks, both elevons should go up, and they do. When we push our stick to the right elevons should go up, and they do. When we push it to the left goes up, and it does. And then finally, for our rudder, when we push our rudder stick to the right, the motor should travel the same direction as the stick. So when I push it to the right, it moves to the right. When I push it to the left, it moves to the left. And that's perfect. Let's go ahead and check the rotation of our motor to make sure that the motor rotation is working properly. Now, if it's backwards, again, all you need to do is switch any 2 of the 3 leads for our ESC extensions. All right, so the motor's traveling counterclockwise, and that's the exact direction we need for our prop. At this point, we can go ahead and fasten down our prop, and we want to make sure that our servo direction doesn't allow the prop to travel so far that it accidentally cuts into the trailing edge of our wing or our fuselage. If you're flying without the FT-Aura 5, all you simply need to do is adjust your travel setting to be able to minimize that control throw so it doesn't go too far. So friends, I want to thank you for being part of the Flite family. Thank you for taking the time to build along with the whole retro rocket journey, from our wing to our fuselage to all the different power systems and even the thrust vectoring unit. Our hope is that the retro rocket can give you lots of opportunities and lots of fun memories, not only for yourself, but also with your friends and family. Can't wait to be in the next build with you, and we'll see you next time.